Wiz, looking back at your youth, what was that initial spark that made you decide I'm going to fly the most dangerous fighter jets in the world? And was that like a specific moment or more like a pure obsession with speed?
It wasn't necessarily speed. I think it started with my parents instilling in me service above self and serving your country. I was raised to believe the United States was just a great place and freedoms. And, I was a child of Reagan and the 80s and the shining house on the hill and a beacon of freedom. And then, growing up, a lot of folks, I was a young Irish Catholic kid from South Jersey, South Philadelphia. And a lot of my uncles served in World War II or had military service. So I, always kind of had a little bit of a military tint. And then growing up in South New Jersey, my best friend who lived across the street, his dad flew fighters in Vietnam and also flew for the New Jersey Air National Guard. And he was a pilot for Eastern Airlines. So he'd be wearing his flight suit some days and his Trans Am and, his airline captain suit the other days. And he was just larger than life. He was a pretty cool guy. And, I'd go out to the fence at the air station and stand there and just see these F-106s take off in full afterburner and get the heat in the face and everything like that. And then, yeah, of course, going to McGuire Air Force Base when I was a kid and seeing the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds, just always, instilled a sense of fighter aviation in me. And I lived on the beach. I love the ocean. I love the sea. So I kind of put those things together, aviation and the sea. And that led me to naval aviation. I mean, my Air Force brothers and sisters land on nice, big, solid runways. And I wanted to do the most challenging aviation thing I could do on this planet, which is being a United States Navy fighter pilot and landing aboard ships day, night, bad weather, low on fuel in the middle of the ocean. So it was kind of a rolling series of things that brought me to naval aviation. And it's interesting to me because I knew that I can't even remember just in
Mm,
earliest memories, right? And then in high school, I'm going to age myself. In high school
mm,
in 1986, Top Gun came out, the first one,
mm.
obviously. And everybody wanted to be a fighter pilot. I mean, the year before in 1985, the Navy was advertising in the New York Times. They had classified ads, hey, do you want to fly jets for the Navy? And then a year later, they're turning people away. So I had to, when I got to college, I had to study even harder than I thought I needed to because everybody wanted to fly. So I was in Naval ROTC at, at a college here in Florida, got commissioned and selected aviation. And then went to Pensacola Naval Air Station, which is where all naval aviators start their training. And that begins the process. And naval aviation is a pyramid, right? To get to the top, there's a lot of people at the bottom because the Navy, you might want to fly fighter jets. Well, the Navy has a lot of jets that do intelligence, jamming, refueling, attack, anti-submarine. And then they have a lot of propeller planes. Then they have a ton of helicopters. So once you get in primary flight training, you have to study and be the best in that phase. So I did. And then I selected jets out of primary flight training and I got assigned to Kingsville Naval Air Station, which is in South Texas, man, right in the middle of nowhere. And once I got to jets, the whole process starts over again. You start at the bottom of the barrel because everybody wants to fly fighters. And at the time, the hottest fighter was the F-18 Hornet. I mean, the Tomcat was still flying and everybody, but I didn't want to fly with anybody. I don't want some dude sitting behind me in the back seat. I wanted to fly the F-18 Hornet. So I studied and did my best in flight school and finished number one in my class. So I got if you finish number one in your class in each one of those phases, you automatically get your first choice. So I wanted to make sure I left nothing to chance. So I selected F-18s out of flight school, and then I went to Naval Air Station Lemoore in California, right in the middle of California. And when you're in training, you fly, the orange and white airplanes. They're trainers. They're not your fleet jet. So when you get to the F-18 that you got assigned, you have to go through what's the RAG, and you have to learn how to fly and fight the F-18. And that took about, I don't know, it was 8 months or a year of
Yeah.
additional training. And in the RAG is where you go to the boat, the carrier, for the first time at night. During flight school, you go during the day. And I was old, so I went in the T2 Buckeye and I went in the A4 Skyhawk. And then, yeah, I went to the boat for the first time at night in the F-18. And man, that was just a absolutely terrifying experience. Landing aboard a boat at night is not fun. The day, I love it. It's so cool, but at night, it's terrifying. And then after you finish your training in the F-18, you get assigned to your fleet squadron. And I got assigned to a squadron called VFA 94, Strike Fighter Squadron 94, the Mighty Shrikes. And I went to them, I request, because I finished top of my class in the RAG too. And I wanted to go to a squadron that was getting ready to deploy almost immediately because I wanted, I didn't want to go to a squadron that just got off cruise and, they're not going on deployment for another year or two. I wanted to hit the ground running. So I went to VFA 94, and that's when my fleet tour started in the Navy flying Hornets.
I understand. And during this time, when you made it to Top Gun, you became an instructor. I'm thinking from the inside, what is the actual psychological difference between a standard military pilot and a Top Gun pilot? What separates the best from the rest?
So after in the Navy, you do tours. You do a sea tour, which is on a carrier and going overseas. And then after your 3 years is up doing that, you rotate to what's called shore duty.
Mhm.
So when I was on sea duty, I did 2 deployments to Iraq on the Abraham Lincoln and the Kitty Hawk, and I flew combat sorties over Iraq. When
Mm.
I got done with that, my shore duty was an F-18 instructor. So I went back and became an instructor in the RAG, and that was at Marine Corps Air Station in El Toro in Orange County, Florida. And then they closed it, and I
Mm.
went down to Miramar, a Marine Corps Air Station Miramar. That's when I got off active duty, and I went and flew for the reserves. I got picked up to fly F-18s out of Naval Air Station Fort Worth in Texas. That's when I got selected to go to Top Gun. And I went to Top Gun. So there's a couple courses at Top Gun. There's the long blue course where young men and women go through a longer course as good guys, right? But also at Top Gun, they have to fight bad guys, right? They have to fight what are called adversaries. So I went through what's called the Adversary Course. I studied, you have to be a really good guy to
Mhm.
be picked to be a bad guy because you got to know all the blue guy stuff like the back of your hand. You got to be a really good guy, and then they'll teach you how to be a bad guy. So when I went to Top Gun, I had to learn all the threat aircraft performance capabilities, missile ranges, tactics. I'd lead, the good guys might have, 12 jets coming against me. And I was in charge of anywhere from 20 to 25 bad guy aircraft, F5s, F-18s, Tomcats, F-16s. So I'd control all these bad guy assets to give them a pretty realistic threat picture. And not only that, up at Top Gun, whenever the blue guys are coming to attack, we have like an airfield, we have tanks out there, and we also have surface air missile sites all over the range. And the CIA or other alphabet agencies go and acquire the current bad guy systems from around the planet. So when the good guys are trying to attack, they're getting lit up by what they're really going to see in the real world, real enemy aircraft. So when I was at Top Gun as an adversary lead, I was doing all the bad guy stuff. And that happened during my tour as a reservist. I flew for the reserves for about 5 years. The job of an adversary pilot is to die for the motherland, right? And my job was to be a missile sponge. I mean, if we were slaying good guys, it wasn't a good thing. But the learning curve was pretty steep with those folks, right? And that's a good adversary doesn't have an ego. You fly the threat portfolio. You don't fly it like I'm a really awesome good guy and a bad guy jet. You fly it like they would fly it, and you don't do any better or you don't do any worse. You fly a good adversary profile. So that's when I went to Top Gun and then went back to my squadron. That's another misconception is people think, you go to Top Gun for years. Instructors do. They're there for their 3-year tour.
Yeah.
But people who go through the courses get the patch on their shoulder and you go back to your fleet squadron and you teach. It's like, hey, I just came from the mountain and I have all the knowledge, and you share it with all your squadron mates. So, they kind of at Top Gun train you to be a teacher to go back to your squadron and share the knowledge that you just got.
Speaking of bad guys, you flew a lot of combat missions over Iraq. I think when you're taxiing on that aircraft carrier, knowing this could be your last flight, what goes through your mind at that moment? How do you like force your brain to focus on the mission instead of fear?
So a couple things. I go out of my way to say I'm not a combat veteran. I mean, these things hanging on the wall say I flew combat sorties. My combat sorties over Iraq were the most boring flying I've ever done in my life. I mean, it was a,
Okay.
it was it was a known threat environment. I mean, they
Mm.
were beaten in the submission. I mean, I got lit up every once in a while by enemy radar. I mean, the toughest flying that I ever did in my naval aviation career was at Top Gun. And that makes sense, right? Because we have a motto: you fight like you train and you train like you fight. So if we go anywhere in the world and we're surprised or we're outgunned, our training sucked, right? So, when my combat sorties over Iraq were the toughest part of my combat sorties was landing back aboard the boat at night, low on fuel and bad weather. So I wouldn't and it's funny to say, you know what we're worried about as we get launched off of that aircraft carrier to go over bad guy country? That we have to land back aboard the boat. It shocks a lot of people. Like, you're not worried about the mission, or it's like, not really. I mean, that's all that stuff. When you come back to land aboard the boat, man, first of all, there's 5,000 people watching you technically. I mean, every TV in the ready room has like the landing. So when you're behind the boat trying to land, man, that's a multi-billion-dollar asset waiting for you. And if you screw it up, everybody's going to know about it, right? When I'm flying my missions, I'm in my cockpit, I'm kind of in my own little world and executing. But when you got to land aboard the boat, man, especially if it's pitch and deck or, night, bad weather, and you're in an F-18 Hornet, you're always low on fuel. You take off, you're already under fuel. You're already having to look for the tanker. So the F-18 did not have a ton of gas, so you were always managing your fuel. So I was more concerned about the other stuff than I was the mission itself, to be honest with you. But that was the situation in Iraq. I guarantee you the guys and gals over in Epic Fury right now are caring about both, not only the landing, but also the mission. It's a lot more dynamic threat environment than I had to deal with.
I understand. If we go a little bit to the future, speaking of missions, and today, military in general across the world is moving heavily towards an AI and unmanned drones. As a
Mhm.
former top manager, do you think an algorithm can never truly replicate that aggressive split-second gut feeling of a human pilot in a dogfight?
Yes and no. I mean, AI has been proven to take in a ton of information and make a decision instantaneously based on that. But what if that information is wrong, or it's nuanced, or there's something a little off about it? That's the problem with AI. I mean, I'm reading articles about, Israel has these AI that spits out the answer like kill that guy when they got something wrong all the way up here, and it's never corrected. I'm pretty sure the SOP, the standard operating procedures in the US, is there is a human in the kill chain. There has to be. But man, it's terrifying. If you can dream it or have a nightmare about it, somebody built it or is trying to build it. These drone swarms, man, it's terrifying. I think the last fighter pilot is probably in grade school. I mean, the F-35s and the newest airplanes are built for about a 30-year lifespan. So, we're getting to the point, even the F-35, a buddy of mine that got done flying the F-35 recently, he's got a t-shirt that says tech support. He's like, man, I just sit there and the jet just does. It
Mhm.
jams, talks to other jets. They talk to each other in the back. He's like, it's creepy, dude. The thing lands itself. It can take itself off. I mean, hell, it auto ejects you. There was a video a couple years ago of a F-35 having a hard landing in Fort Worth, Texas, and the jet ejected the dude on its own. So technology is great until it's not. And when it comes to warfare, man, you need a human in the loop. So I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for. So I'm kind of right in the middle of all of it. But I know for a fact that aviation is going the way of technology. I mean, 70 to 80% of aviation mishaps are pilot error. And if I think I flew for FedEx for about 10 months. I hated it. Flying the backside of the clock, I was miserable. But the cargo carriers, UPS, FedEx, are pushing behind the scenes with the FAA to be single pilot because they can auto land, they can taxi, they can, they can do everything by themselves. They're going to try and push to go single pilot soon. I guarantee it. Now, why? Because it's a cargo. People don't care about bunch of boxes if it crashes and burns, right? All they'd lose is one pilot. So I think in my lifetime, I'm not that old, but in my lifetime, we'll probably see single pilot cargo and maybe even airliners because it's just the technology is just that good. But man, for anybody who's listening and yelling at the screen right now, I don't want it. Trust me, I want you because somebody lights off an electromagnetic pulse around wherever those servers are and everything dies. I've seen, what was that, Die Hard, whatever Die Hard movie where they take over the ILS system and crash planes. I mean,
Second one.
I don't want this to happen, but man, when you're an airline CEO looking at the bottom line and a captain and a first officer who are making, $1 million a year each type of thing between them and 401ks and benefits and everything, you start thinking this way. And not until something crashes and a lot of people die will people freak out, I guarantee you.
Understand. A follow-up question to that: if the future cockpit means commanding drones from a computer screen, does it become too detached like a video game, or does it require a complete new type of warrior psychology?
Man, it does. The fidelity of simulators nowadays is insane. 20 years ago, I was in Fort Worth doing a civilian job of helping to build the next generation of F-18 simulators. Man, the fidelity in these things were insane. Like the guy you're flying formation with looks at you, he takes his oxygen mask off. I'm like, oh my God. I mean, they program if you hit something with a missile, it's got 100 different ways of potentially exploding the wing. I mean, I'm just like, holy crap. So there's so much fidelity that you get desensitized, right? There's something to be said for going downstairs in the squadron to the paraloft, to putting on your G suit, to putting on your harness, walking out to the jet, pre-flighting, sweating, starting it up, getting airborne, flying formation for real. Like, oh, if I hit this guy, I'm going to die, instead of like the simulator turns red. So what I'm seeing with a whole generation of so the No Fallen Heroes Foundation, I've actually had some drone operators reaching out with PTS. They're like, man, I'm sitting in a room with too much air conditioning at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, and I'm putting a hellfire into a cave and killing humans on the other side of the planet, and then I'm going to a strip club an hour later. It's like they're getting desensitized to death. And these operators, it's pixels on a screen, man. But when you're in the cockpit and you're putting eyes on, you're in an Apache helicopter watching guys get blown into hair, teeth, and eyeballs. So it's a weird place to be in right now. I mean, an old crusty guy like me, I saw drone operator receives a distinguished flying cross. I'm like, are you kidding me? The guy's sitting in a chair thousands of miles away from the battle space, and he's like some sort of hero. But I'm an old crusty guy for a reason. I can complain about stuff like that. So it's definitely a different mindset, at least for me.
Mhm.
I haven't sat there in an air conditioned room playing a video game, essentially. But I can tell you those are two different mindsets completely.
Speaking of completely different mindsets, after you left the Navy, you traded for, you could say, a different career, trying on finance. How was it like going from extreme military discipline to people screaming and throwing papers? What was it like your first honest thought that first week? Did you feel like you'd done a massive mistake?
Well, so a couple of things. The firm I went to work with in Chicago, when I showed up, they were closing their floor operations. So they had actually closed the floor operations, and they were all upstairs, all those floor traders. So it was that the sound of trading to me was mouse clicks. It was eerily quiet, this massive trading floor, and you just hear kind of a murmur of clicks and people talking. And I wasn't a trader. I taught myself how to trade on active duty and trade options and stuff. So I was kind of a retail trader, and then I got brought into this big firm. I tell people, I was like Eddie Murphy in the movie Trading Places. But it was so I tell people trading's a form of combat. Somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. Which side do you want to be on? So I applied everything I was learning as a fighter pilot to my trading, having a strategy, implementing tactics that support the strategy, managing risk, contingency planning. Like before I ever get airborne on a mission, we sit in the briefing room and go, what could possibly go wrong on this mission? And we talk through it. Why? Because when we assume it's going to go wrong airborne, we're ready. We already briefed this, right? So we what if to death in the brief. It's interesting because people think, if you listen to a mission, it's deadly quiet. The only time people are yelling and screaming over the radio, and nobody's yelling and screaming over the radio, is when something doesn't go as briefed. If everything's going as briefed, we call it calm by exception. Don't say a word, man, unless you need to. Right. So it's kind of eerily quiet. So when I applied everything I learned as a fighter pilot to trading, I started crushing it. And it's funny because when I talked to this firm, they're like, how do you do? I'm like, well, I just do this. You guys don't do this? And it's like, wow, you're brilliant. I'm like, oh my God, this is a multi-billion-dollar firm. You guys make money in spite of yourself. So it was cool. So yeah, I went up there and I was the managing director of strategy for about 4 years for this firm. And it was I worked with the traders and all that stuff, but it was more about me bringing how I thought as a fighter pilot to this firm. Briefing, right? SPAs, single points of accountability. In the military, there's one person in charge of an aircraft carrier, right? The captain. If that ship runs aground and he's eating or sleeping or working out or down in the engine room, like hanging out with the engine room guys to see how their day is, and that ship runs aground, guess who gets fired? He does, right? There's not like, oh, well, I was down here. Well, if I was the admiral relieving him of his duties, I would have said you needed to spend less time down there and more time teaching people how to drive the boat. So in the business world, it's a little bit of a foreign concept, a single point of accountability. The business world likes multiple, like, because I remember, I think it was the first week I was at that firm, there was an issue with getting quotes from one of the exchanges to the floor. Lost $4 million or something like that. And the partners running the firm, they're like, Whiz, can you go debrief that? That's another thing. In the business world, 95% of businesses don't debrief. Something goes wrong or the project's over with or something ends. They're like, all right, let's go. Next thing. No, 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 no. Stop. Let's debrief.
Mm.
What worked? What didn't? And how are we going to improve our execution? What are the lessons learned? That's what we do in every fighter debrief. So I got the tech directors at this trading firm all in a room, Ukrainian guy and Chinese, smart 500-pound dudes. And I said, okay, who's in charge of getting quotes from that exchange to this trading floor? Not a word. I'm like, okay. I thought maybe it was a language issue. I'm like, okay. And I said the same thing again. And they all kind of looked at each other. I'm like, am I speaking, Yiddish or what's going on here? And finally, one guy's like, well, Wiz, he kind of does this and I kind of do that. And then I'm like, stop talking. Shut up. I said, who has 51% of the vote? Who on this group or team it gets congratulated for success or gets pounded for failure? And they all were just kind of like, I'm like, done. So when I went to the partners after that debrief, I'm like, well, here's one of your problems. Nobody's in charge. They all kind of pointed at each other, right? So that, I didn't bring, I kind of brought my trading type of style to there, but they have a lot of black box stuff that was ones and zeros anyway. So I was more focused on the infrastructure of the business. Like, for example, red teaming. When I get done briefing a mission, if you and I were going to go fly a mission over Iran today, we put hours into this planning together, you and me. We're like, man, we're brilliant. This thing's flawless. We'd go get killed. Why? Because we need to stop and we need to go get a couple squadron mates who weren't involved in our planning, but they have situational awareness as to what's going on. I bring them in, I sit them down, and I go, red team, here's what we're going to do today. And I brief them on the whole thing and they just sit there quiet, taking notes. And then when I get done briefing, I say, what do you got? And you can hear the shotgun go like this. And they start blasting holes in the plan. They become the enemy. Did you think about this? Did you think about that? What if the tanker doesn't show up? What if you get shot down? I mean, boom, 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 boom. The only words out of my mouth, thank you for your input. I write that down. Why? Because the natural instinct is to do what? Get defensive. Of course we thought about that, you jerk. My God, no, we didn't. What a great point. Nope. You don't say a word. Thank you. Next. And you write all their concerns down. And then once they leave, you go, holy crap, man, let's go through each one of these. That one doesn't apply. That doesn't. Okay, this one was good. Anytime I've done the red team process, either in a fighter squadron or a business, 30% better. Easily. So if you don't red team your plan before you execute, who's going to do it for you? The enemy. And they'll gladly do it for you, right? So these were the concepts I brought from fighter aviation to the business world. And that could have been at a multi-billion-dollar trading firm. It could have been at NVIDIA. It could have been at a car factory. Copy paste. These are processes and procedures that help the military scale. That's why a lot of businesses love military men and women, is because of that type of mindset. They can teach you how to sell a widget or, design a car. They can't teach you leadership, execution, and accountability. And that's really what businesses need, because a lot of businesses have death by planning. I mean, we have a plan to plan. Well, man, your planning process probably sucks, especially if there's nobody who's accountable for anything,
Understand. Speaking of the business and money, 2008, a lot of people lost a lot of money. And for you, what was it like when everything just collapsed those years? And how did you keep your cool during that time? I mean, was it like the time from the cockpit that taught you about handling financial panic and keeping it cool, or describe that?
So I was at ground zero.
Yeah.
during the global financial crisis. I was in the Chicago Board of Trade. I was in the Chicago Board Options Exchange. I ran over to the SIBO and watched the VIX pit. They still, guys trading the VIX as it went to 90 something, the highest the VIX had ever been. But I treated it like I do an emergency in the airplane. Absolute calm. What's panicking going to do? Absolutely nothing. So that's when you actually take a deep breath and go, I'm completely calm. It's interesting. Back when I was flying my first training jets in the Navy, there was an old analog stopwatch in the cockpit, and it's used for holding and stuff like that, at least in the old days. But a lot of my instructors said, hey man, anything goes wrong, you immediately, it's called punch the clock and wait 10 seconds. Why? Because usually if something goes wrong and you start acting out of irrationality, you're going to do something wrong. Do you know how many airliners have crashed because, my God, engine one is on fire? Okay, shut it down. And the guy shuts down engine two, the good engine. And now they have no engines, right? So, and if you ever saw the movie Miracle on the Hudson, with Sully, soon as the birds hit, what did he do? Pause. Let's take an inventory and then let's figure it out. So you never, unless the only exception to the take a deep breath rule is if you get hit by a surface air missile and you're on fire, then you just pull the ejection handles. You're going to know. Or you have a midair collision like we saw last month at that air show. I mean, you're going to know if it's like, oh man, I got to get out of the airplane. But that's different. Right. I mean, if something's going wrong where I'm not on fire, but I'm still flying, calm. So that's how it was in 2008. And I at the time I had started what was called the Options News Network. We were the CNBC for options. All we talked about was options. We shoot on the floor of the SIBO and the CBOT. But I was completely against what happened in 2008. The Federal Reserve jumped in to bail out Wall Street. Absolute disgrace. Should not have ever happened. If capitalism needs to be saved or bailed out, it ain't capitalism, right? So they bailed out Wall Street. And I used to have to dress down to get into the Board of Trade because of the Occupy Wall Street protesters that would be around the exchange building. I'd be like, yeah. And then I'd have to hide and, go in the side door. Looking back on it, those protesters were right. How dare you bail out Bank of America or Goldman Sachs? Come on, man, things need to be able to fail. The fact that nobody went to jail during the global financial crisis is just an absolute disgrace. But, because of the Fed jumping in to save capitalism in 2008, it's been free money ever since. When you look at the S&P 500, and they did it again in COVID. I didn't mind the COVID, the Fed jumping in during COVID because the federal government shut the country down. But 2008 was a Wall Street calamity. They should not have been bailed out. Things need to be able to fail, right? And I blame George Bush, the kid, not the dad, not the naval aviator, the great American, because he's sitting in the Oval Office and Paulson, who ran Goldman Sachs, he was the Treasury Secretary, ran into the Oval Office like, Mr. President, we have to bail out Wall Street or, people are going to die type of thing. He's like, geez, that sounds awful. So Bush had no idea what he's doing. He trusted the former head of Goldman Sachs to bail his buddies out. Absolute disgrace. So if you look at a chart of the S&P 500 going up and to the right, overlay on top of that, the Fed's balance sheet. We went from like 500 billion on the Fed's balance sheet during the dot-com, pop to 2008, and then it goes straight up. I think it got as high as like $8 trillion. So when people are like, oh, I can't believe this market's up here, I'm like, don't fight the Fed. You're not powerful enough, man. An organization that can print money out of thin air and it goes into equities, ride it up, man. I don't agree with it. I think it's awful that we did this, but I'm printing money because of it. So, I tell people the market is not the economy, and the economy is not the stock market. As a matter of fact, the worse the economy gets, the better the stock market might do. Why? Because Uncle Sam's going to jump in again, like, oh, geez, we can't have a bear market or we can't have this stuff, print money, but interest rates. So, I know it's all a joke and a scam, but I'm going to make money as it's all going on. And if we ever get around to the fact of recognizing this is all a joke and a scam and it starts imploding, I'll pound it into the dirt and make even more money. So I got no problems with any of it because as an options trader, I can potentially make money up, down, or sideways.
I understand. After those years, what was the next plan for you? How did you get around after that?
So the when I started at that Chicago firm, I was still flying fighters in Texas. So I'd have to commute down to Texas to get current and get back in my fighter jet mentality. And it just wasn't, you can't. You got to be current. You got to be proficient in the airplane. And I was like, man, I'm barely maintaining my proficiency. But it was also a tough period because on one hand, I'm in a fighter squadron where I trust those men and women with my life, or they're not going to be in the squadron long. I'm in a Wall Street firm where I couldn't trust somebody to watch my wallet when I went to the bathroom for 5 minutes. I mean, they were singularly focused on money to a fault.
Mm,
I'm not joking when I'd say, I'd say some of these guys would push their own mother in front of a bus for a buck. I mean, so I was in a bad place. I was
mm,
getting separated from my God, my bride, my kids, that trading culture, that's a lot of drugs.
mm,
That's a lot of drinking. It's a hard environment. So at about the 3 or 4 year point, I'm like, man, this ain't, first of all, I'm a beach guy and Lake Michigan ain't a beach to me. I need sun and sand.
mm,
And, you know, Chicago in February is a survival situation. So my wife is from Boca Raton, Florida. So I said, you know what? I can do this on my own. I can make my own financial something. And so we moved to South Florida in about 2010 and I started Top Gun Options where I teach people how to
mm,
trade options, kind of with the methodologies you and I talked about. But around that time, after the COVID market crash, it was disgusting. I pounded the market into the dirt. Trump posted a tweet, like, oh, stocks are looking good here. I'd be a buyer of stocks. I bought puts the next morning when the S&P gapped down. I think I made like $750,000 in a single trade. It was obscene. I think we made about close to $3 million in 3 weeks. It was great. Why do I bring this up? Because around that time, my fourth F-18 brother killed himself. And I looked at my bride, Susie, and I said, we got to do something about veteran suicide. We just made a ton of money. We're not a pharaoh. They're not going to put this in our casket, or our tomb, and we're going to take it to the next world. Why don't we start a nonprofit to try and end veteran suicide? So that's when, we started trying to do something. But, standing at my whiteboard in my office, I'm like, how do you keep a veteran from killing himself? Help him pay the rent, help him write a resume, buy him a suit for an interview. We're grasping at straws. And around that time, a friend of mine said, hey, there's a group of Navy SEAL and Special Forces veterans that go down to Mexico and they do psychedelic assisted therapy. And, there's a really cool group going in a couple weeks. Would you want to go? And I said, man, go to Mexico and do drugs with Navy SEALs. It sounds great. It sounds like a party. I had no clue what I was getting into, but, I'll give you the cliff notes, man. It wasn't fun. It wasn't recreational. I've done some challenging things in my life, and it was without a doubt one, if not the most challenging thing I've ever done.
mm,
But it healed decades of trauma. I was down for 14 hours and I got easily 30 to 40 years of therapy. It destroyed alcohol in my life. If I smelled alcohol up to a year after this experience, it made me dry heave. I got sick and it healed childhood trauma, military trauma. I'm not one to use this sentence lightly. I was born again.
mm,
Easily, I was born again.
mm,
So I got home and looked at my bride and I said, this is how we're going to end veteran suicide. So we started the No Fallen Heroes Foundation. And for the past 5 years, we've been giving grants to veterans, first responders, and family members to go potentially sit with these powerful compounds and heal. And to date, we've helped close to 300 in the past 5 years. It's just been absolutely incredible. We haven't had not a single suicide, not a single adverse event to a person. These people would tell you it was one of the most transformational events of their life. So it's been pretty cool. I mean, 5 years ago, I was on a mattress on my back in Mexico for 14 hours. And last month I was in the Oval Office with the president and some of my buddies who were on that trip for the president signing an executive order on
mm.
this compound called ibogaine. So it's been a wild 5 years going from a mattress in Mexico to the White House.
I understand. I think before these 5 years, what was it like before you went down to Mexico and all? What was it like for you mentally, losing friends and comrades, and personally running your business and handling those tragic cases? What was that period in your life like?
Probably the toughest period of my life. It was the darkest period of my life. I was on my way out. There was a lot of dark nights of the soul, man. Separated from a bride, laying on a bathroom floor, spiraling the drain. And if it wasn't for the vision of my children's faces, I probably wouldn't be here. It was very dark, very tough. alcohol, drugs, like I said,
Mhm.
disconnected from my mission. But all of those things were because I was disconnected from God, period. What does ego stand for? Edge God out. So after 52 years at that time of just buildup of ego, of trauma and shame and addiction and regret, loss, this experience dropped into my life exactly when it was supposed to.
Mhm.
Because that was it. I was at a bottom, and that's usually where God ends up meeting you. So it was tough. I mean, to many people, it might have been like, wow, he's a top performer and fighter pilot, business CEO. And, this guy's hitting on all cylinders, man. Well, guess what? Those are the people you usually got to keep an eye on. I was wearing a lot of masks and they were heavy, right? Those masks were very heavy for me. And then as a result of this, man, I ain't got no masks. All those were thrown into a fire and destroyed by God. So yeah, those were probably the darkest times of my life. But I have reached the point in my life today where I can say I'm grateful for my suffering. It brought me to who I am today and this mission. And I've helped a ton of guys and gals who say the same thing, like, man, I can actually look back and find gratitude in the bad things that happened to me because, at the end of the day, they weren't necessarily that bad. I
Mhm.
mean, I helped an Apache pilot who was involved in a strike on a couple cars that, one car was a bad guy. Well, one car was a family. And he's like, Whiz, I carried that for 19 years. When I got home from Afghanistan, I wasn't close to my wife or my kids because I carried the guilt of killing that family. And sitting in ceremony, with the sacrament of psilocybin, he's like, I was at the car, walked right up to the car, and I looked in, and they were perfect. They were angelic. They were happy. And they said, Dario, we're okay. It's okay. We love you. We forgive you. You are free. And that afternoon, when he told us his story, man, I was crying. Everybody was crying. He's like, I can't believe this, Wiz. So it's been an incredible ride to go from my lows to the best I've ever felt in my life. I mean, man, I still get my crappy days every once in a while, but I'm not in the crappy day. I can step outside of it and go, hey man, bad day, not a bad life. But old me, when I was having a crappy day, everybody's going to have one and join me, and we're all going to spiral down together. But that guy died on a mattress on the floor of a home in Mexico.
Before you went down to Mexico and before you started the No Fallen Heroes, what does the help look like for an aviator or a trooper? What is it like? You sit down with a shrink for 1 hour a week, and then that's your help. And what does that look like before?
Well, what's scary is I have to say I don't know because when I got out of the military and I went to the VA and said, "Hey, man, I got these things wrong with me," guess what the VA said? Well, these aren't service related. Like,
Okay.
are you insane? Are you insane? So I didn't need the benefits. I didn't need the money. It was a matter of principle for me. They denied all these things, and then I had buddies who are like, "Man, that's the way it is. You got to appeal." And then usually by your third appeal, they'll give it to you. I'm like, are you kidding me? Now I know why I see on the news that a vet went into the parking lot and put a bullet in his head in a VA hospital. So I don't know. I mean, today I know because with No Fallen Heroes, the VA called 988 or there's counselors available or 20. Yeah, I get that there's stuff now, but man, and never forget that as an aviator or any veteran for that matter, we're taught to compartmentalize. We're taught to like tough it out. And, saying there's something wrong with you is a sign of weakness. So that's why I go out to as many people as I can and tell them it's okay not to be okay. I wasn't. I wish I had known. And one of the additional things I had, I'm not going to say wrong, one of the things that was an issue with me was flying fighters. For 15 years, man, I fought the jet on the edge of consciousness, on nearly blacking out. The human body is not designed to pull 7, 8, 9 Gs over 15 years. It's just not. Luckily, I don't have some of the issues my brothers or sisters have, like back and neck and stuff like that. But I can tell you that I remember one of my flight surgeons saying, you guys have no idea what this is doing to your body, especially your brains. I'm like, what? And as a naval aviator, I've had hundreds of car crashes. Imagine sitting in your driveway in your car and having a crane take you up to the second story and dropping you. That's what it feels like landing aboard a ship. 900 feet per minute. And if the deck's coming up to meet you, man, there's been landings where I'm like, my God, that hurt. So there was a lot of physical trauma that I experienced as well. And again, the VA's like, well, no, not service related. I'm like, I was one of my jobs in the fleet was an LSO, landing signal officer. So when I wasn't flying, I'd be on the back of the ship, with the headset trying to help my fellow aviators land. If you've seen the flight deck, you see the kids wearing the big Mickey Mouse ears, right? Well, they
Yeah.
wear foamies underneath and Mickey Mouse ears. So they wear double hearing protection. As an LSO, we only wore foamies because I had to be able to hear their engine. Like, did they take a little power off? Did they add power? So I had to listen. But that jet would come past me 20 feet away and land in full afterburner. So from that point in time until the day I take my last breath, I have horrific tinnitus. Talking to you right now, I have a high pitched squeal. I can't sit in silence for the rest of my life. It is a high pitched whine. And I think one or two of my buddies that checked out by their own hand, it might have been due to tinnitus. It is a horror. I bring this up because when I went to the VA about my hearing issues, not service related, I'm like, the VA manual says an LSO gets an automatic 10% disability denied. I'm like, oh my God, man, this is insane. So long answer to your short question. There's a saying in the veteran community in the US. If you've been to one VA, you've been to one VA. Because I hear people like, Whiz, what are you bitching about the VA? The one in Spokane, Washington's been nothing but great. I'm like, yay for you. How about the one in Arizona where 9 people, so it's the standard. It is not standardized or uniform care throughout the VA system, period. So they've gotten better, obviously, because guys like me with my pitchfork and torches, trying to tear the place down and make improvements. But man, they can always do better.
Speaking of G's before, the very first time you sat in a jet and you had all these G's behind you, describe that feeling for us regular people. What was that like?
Well, you got to be ready for it, man. If you're not, you're going to take a nap. So you got to be in great shape. A lot of leg work, a lot of ab work. We wear a G suit, like skinny jeans that inflate or on your legs and your stomach to squeeze the blood into your head. They teach us a breathing pattern and how to cut the air off to squeeze, and it's called G tolerance, maneuvers. But for the first time, you have no idea what's hitting you, man. It feels like a 1,000-pound safe is sitting on top of you, just all this weight. But by the end, I was in it, man. I looked forward to the G. So I knew I was fighting, and I'm doing the coolest thing in the world right now. I'm flying and fighting an F-18. I used to love the Gs, but now that I'm a little older, man, that it's a little bit more painful on the body. And it's, G tolerance is a thing. If you don't, like, I forget the current air to air combat rules or dogfighting rules. Like, if you haven't done a dogfight in a week or 14 days, whatever the current rules are, you have to go out on a flight on your own and just go out there and pull, you know, before you can go dogfight with another jet. Cause it's a perishable feeling or skill. If you haven't, been in a dogfight in a couple of weeks and you just go out and try and put on 9 Gs, you might pass out, man. And we don't want that happening. So you got to stay proficient with the G forces.
And one thing is that I usually ask all my guests is something non-related with their profession, but it's one thing you feel that our modern society has lost, but that we desperately need to bring back.
God, God, man. And I don't care what you call it, right? And I choose to use that word, but I don't care if it's source, divine, Allah, God, Steve, Mother Earth, the universe, truth. Working in the psychedelic space for 5 years and based on my own experiences, once you dissolve that ego, there is something on the other side that is loving and compassionate and full of empathy. Source. It's just incredible. I've helped the most agnostic atheists on the planet, and on the other side of ceremony, I'm just sitting there smiling. They're like, I'm not going to call it God. I'm like, I'm just sitting here. And they're like, there was something that loved me and was forgiving. And I felt part of that and everything. I'm like, yeah, man, you choose the word. But my point being is we've become so disconnected from whatever that source is and each other because we're not individuals, man. Even the most nerdy scientist will say, if the universe is expanding, that means it contracted. So we all came, according to the Big Bang Theory, from the tiniest, most infinite speck of whatever it was, hot, dense, and everything. And then all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, all this stuff kind of appeared and kept expanding. So you and I, man, the atoms, protons, neurons, electrons we're all the same family. So I think the belief that we really need to ditch. I think one of the reasons some of these compounds still remain a Schedule 1 drug in the United States is because they can turn warriors into peacemakers. I've seen meat-eating, knuckle-dragging killers on the other side of ceremony be like, I can't believe, what are we doing? What are we doing? Flags, religions, borders, countries. Come on, man. I mean, we're all in the same team. So I think if we all focused a little bit more on, again, choose your word. I choose to use the word God. I think the world would be a much, much better place. And I get it, man. People are like, God doesn't exist and everything like that. I'm like, I hope that you better pray you're right. But I mean, it's a better place if you do believe in something a greater than you, right? Our society in America and a lot of societies around this planet have become just so incredibly selfish. Me, man, instead of how can I be of service? How can I help you? So I really think we need to lift our eyes up every once in a while and just take a look around at like the incredible beauty of this world, this planet, this universe, this everything, and this gift of life, instead of just focused on what divides us and hate and war and all that type of stuff, man. I just think the world would be a much better place, you know?
Mhm. Wes, you talked about how your career in the Air Force was and financial time. I think for the audience, any more memories or advice you'd like to give them on either aviation, finance, or life in general?
Well, in aviation, always remember somebody's trying to kill you, including you. There's been a lot of mishaps lately where you just aviation is a self-cleaning oven. You gotta there's no room for mistakes or errors. So you really have to be at the top of your game. My finance advice, man, like we talked about, at least here in the United States, the Fed can at any time an organization can print money out of thin air, you got to be bullish on that organization. I don't care what your personal feelings are. Because Twitter for the past 3 weeks or a month, as the market's just ripped higher, everybody's like, trying to call a top. I'm like, here's my financial advice. The market can remain irrational longer than you can stay solvent, right? So get out of the way, right? If something's on a tear, either join it or get out of the way. And my life advice, man, live in the now. That's one thing on my journey. There was no past. It doesn't exist. Can you visit the past? The past is chemicals in your brain firing like a memory. There is no past. There is no future. Well, Whiz, there's going to be a tomorrow. Well, when's that tomorrow happen? In that now. There's only now. So you got to enjoy this present moment. If most of the time, if people are sad, they're living in the past. If they're anxious, they're living in the future. If they're kind of calm and peaceful, they're being present. So just try and live in this present moment, and I think you're going to do okay.
Great. And for the audience, if they want to follow you on your journey and no fallen heroes, how can they best follow you?
Yeah, on Instagram and all our socials, it's No Fallen Heroes, and then my Instagram or my handle on Instagram is official Whiz Buckley, WHIZ Buckley. And yeah, all our websites, nofallenheroes.com. And then a year ago, we started a church, an entheogenic church down here in South Florida called Sacred Warrior Fellowship. And you can follow that on Instagram too. We use these compounds in a religious ceremonial setting, which is protected in the United States under the First Amendment. So I think we're going on our 1 year anniversary here. So if you're ever in Florida and you'd be interested in sitting in ceremony with our fellowship, we'd love to have you.
Great. Matthew, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with the audience. And we wish you and the fallen heroes all the best.
Thank you, my brother. God bless.
Thank you. Take care.